Number 2. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust Number 20. With the formation of the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, it became Number 126. It was sold to the SECV Geelong Tramways in 1947 to become Number 34. Upon the closure of the Geelong Tramways in 1956, the tram was transferred to Bendigo, where it became Number 2. Number 3. The history of this tram is similar to Number 2, only it operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust Number 16, and later as MMTB Number 122. The tram was sold to the SECV Geelong Tramways in 1947, where it became Number 32, and in 1956, with the closure of that tramway, the tram was transferred to Bendigo, where it became Number 3. In 1975, the tram was painted in the chocolate and cream livery of the MMTB. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide South Australia in 1916 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust as Number 16.
It's the tram, double bogie tram 122, and back in the early days in the 1970s, this was one of the very first projects that the volunteers of the tramways worked on. We used to work every Thursday night, Saturday, Sunday continually on restoring it. It took us over a year to restore this tram, and it was the pride of the fleet, and it was admired by all the tramway enthusiasts on the wonderful work that the Bendigo people could do, the Bendigo Tramways. Anyway, it's sad now to see it uncovered, left out in the open, and all that work we've put into restoring this tram, it's slowly deteriorating. But in time, I'm hopeful that we'll get ample coverage to put this tram back into the museum where it should be. Should never have been left out in the open.
Number 4. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust Number 14. With the formation of the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, it became Number 120. It was sold to the SECV Geelong in 1947 to become Number 33. Upon the closure of the Geelong Tramways in 1956, the tram was transferred to Bendigo, where it became Number 4. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide South Australia in 1916 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 5. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Paran and Malvern Tramways Trust Number 26 and was the granddaddy of all double bogie Melbourne trams, including the W class. With the formation of the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, it became MMTB Number 26. It was sold to the SECV Geelong in 1948 to become Number 36. Upon the closure of the Geelong Tramways in 1956, the tram moved to Bendigo, where it became Number 5. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide South Australia in 1913 for the Paran and Malvern Tramways Trust. Number 6. Originally built as California Combination Tram Number 4 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust, it was sold by the MMTB to the Electric Supply Company of Victoria in Ballarat in the 1930s and became Number 25. Converted to Ballarat-style one-man configuration at Ballarat during the 1930s, it was transferred to Bendigo in 1960 in exchange for Bendigo Bogie Tram Number 1. Builder Duncan and Fraser of Adelaide, South Australia in 1916 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 7. This tram was built as California Combination Tram Number 76 for the Paran and Malvern Tramways Trust. It was sold to the ESCV Ballarat Tramways in the 1930s, where it became Number 19. Converted to Ballarat-style one-man configuration at Ballarat, it transferred to Bendigo in 1960 along with Ballarat Number 25 in exchange for Bendigo Bogie Car Number 1. This tram was restored to the livery first used when it arrived in Bendigo. Builder Meadowbank Manufacturing Company, Sydney, New South Wales in 1915 for the Paran and Malvern Tramways Trust. Number 11. This tram was built new by J.G. Brill and Company, Philadelphia, USA in 1923 for the Melbourne Electric Supply Company, operators of the Geelong Tramways. While in Geelong, it operated as number 14 and was transferred under SECV ownership to Bendigo in 1949, where it became number 11. In 1968, the SECV assessed damage to the tram after an accident with an automobile. Upon inspection, it was found that the side bearers of the tram body had spread and the centre bearers had been severely distorted because of the impact. Repairs of this nature required costly engineering work, and with the closure of the tramway being imminent, it was decided to place car number 11 in storage on 6th Road until the cessation of SECV services in 1972. Work commenced on the restoration of the tram in 1975, and it returned to service in 1986, being painted in the 1950s SECV livery. This tram and its sister number 15 are unique among Burnie trams, as they are the only known Burnies to have longitudinal seating. Number 12. This tram operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust California Combination Tram number 1, and later as MMTB number 107. Sold to the ESCV Bendigo in 1930 and numbered 19. Not to be confused with the current number 19. This was the first of the ex-Melbourne trams to arrive in Bendigo. In 1935, with the arrival of additional trams from Melbourne, the tram was renumbered as number 12 after the original 1903 car was disposed of. It was converted to Bendigo-style one-man configuration during the 1930s. In 1962, the tram was withdrawn from service by the SECV because it was black-banned by the Bendigo branch of the Tramways Union. The tram was considered by the Tramways Union to be in poor condition and not suitable for traffic. It languished at the rear of number 3 Road for many years, mainly being used as a sleeping car for the night shift personnel. In March 1962, the MMTB Footscray system closed, and the Tramways Union used the deterioration of numbers 12 and 16 as a reason to agitate for the acquisition of the retired Footscray trams. The SECV put the case that the Footscray trams would not be compatible at Bendigo and did not pursue this option, the SECV being keen to divest itself of the tramways at Ballarat and Bendigo. Prior to the cessation of services by the SECV, the tram was trialled as a spare because a number of the Burnies had been withdrawn due to accident damage. During its trial trip in service, it was found that the motor cases scraped along the cobblestones in Pall Mall when the tram was fully loaded and was thus withdrawn. SECV maintenance records indicate that the wheels fitted to this car were near life expired, and instead of scrapping the tyres, they were trimmed. SECV maintenance terminology in order to obtain a cheap temporary fix. The tram was made fully operational by the Bendigo Trust in 1975 and did run on special occasions without passengers from time to time until work commenced on its restoration back to Hawthorn Tramways Trust No. 1 in the late 1970s. During the mid to late 1980s, the truck and motors received a complete overhaul, even though the original wheel sets were retained, and the body was dismantled in preparation for restoration. Work was suspended and the tram was transported to the Gasworks depot, where it is in storage awaiting restoration to continue. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia in 1916 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 15. The history of this tram is similar to number 11. While in Geelong, it operated as number 15 and was transferred under SECV ownership to Bendigo in 1948, where it became number 15. In 1959, this tram was involved in an accident with an automobile. Because of the extensive damage, the SECV decided to deregister the tram and use it for spare parts for the remaining Burnie trams. In 1975, work commenced on the restoration of the tram as Melbourne Electric Supply Company, Geelong Tramways No. 15. Initially, most of the work was concentrated on the truck, with the installation of re-profiled wheels, reconditioned motors and brake rigging, so that the tram would be able to move under its own power once again. The tram has been restored in the Melbourne Electric Supply Company Geelong livery of the 1920s and is available for use as a talking tram. Builder, J.G. Brill and Company, Philadelphia, USA 1923 for the Melbourne Electric Supply Company Geelong Tramways. Number 16. Built as California Combination Tram number 84 for the Paranna Malvern Tramways Trust, later became MMTB B-Class number 84. It was sold to the Electric Supply Company of Victoria in 1931 and became Bendigo number 16, converted to one-man configuration at Bendigo in 1935. Only Bendigo one-man tram to have swinging doors instead of concertina gates on the handbrake side platforms. In 1962, the tram was withdrawn from regular service by the SECV due to a ban by the Bendigo branch of the Tramways Union because the body was in poor condition. The tram was thus allocated to short workings, most notably the school special, which ran from Eaglehawk to Thorpe Street during the afternoons, as a replacement tram during tram shortages on the Golden Square to North Bendigo route, and as an extra car on the Eaglehawk line during Easter. In 1965, the tram was withdrawn from all services and work commenced on addressing the issue of excessive body movement, when the two platform floors were removed with the intention of bracing the bearers and relaying the floorboards in a diagonal herringbone format. A disagreement between the SECV Works overseer and the tram depot bodybuilder as to how the job was to be completed ensued, which resulted in a stalemate, and so number 16 sat out the final SECV years at the rear of number 6 road minus its compressor and end platform floors. In 1975, the tram was made fully operational by the Bendigo Trust, and it ran on special outings from time to time. For some years, the tram sat at the top of number 6 road, and whilst the paintwork was in a shabby state, it had been responsible for generating donations to the Tramways Paint Fund. The tram was restored during 2009-10 as California Combination Tram number 84 in time for the centenary celebrations of the Paranna Malvern Tramways Trust on Sunday 30th of May 2010. Builder James Moore and Company, Melbourne, 1917, for the Paranna Malvern Tramways Trust. Number 17. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Paranna Malvern Tramways Trust number 44. With the formation of the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, it became number 44. It was sold to the SECV Bendigo Tramways in 1951 to become number 17. Before closure of the SECV Bendigo Tramways, this car was involved in a major collision with the scrubber car, resulting in its withdrawal from service. Work commenced on the tram's restoration as PMTT number 44, and it became available for service as a talking tram in April 1981. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, 1914, for the Paranna Malvern Tramways Trust. Number 18. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Paranna Malvern Tramways Trust number 45. With the formation of the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, it retained that number. It was sold to the SECV Bendigo Tramways in 1951 to become number 18. The tram was converted to one-man operation in 1952, but because of union work-to-rules measures, did not operate as a one-man tram. Because of its ability to be used as a one-man tram when carrying large charter groups, number 18 became the second maximum traction bogie tram to be painted in the Bendigo Trust livery during 1974. In 1980, work commenced to completely rebuild the tram so that it was more suitable for charter groups. This work was completed in 1983. On the 22nd April 2015, the tram became the Bendigo Anzac Centenary Tram and was rebadged as 45. It has again been returned to its SECV Bendigo Tramways fleet number of 18. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, in 1914 for the Paranna Malvern Tramways Trust. Number 19. One of 4 trams to open the Bendigo Tramways as a vintage talking tram, it is believed that this tram was built during the second decade of the 20th century for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. The tram was not able to be delivered until 1918 because the electrical components could not be obtained due to the influence of World War I. The tram was sold to the newly established Footscray Tramways Trust in 1919, but did not operate for that company because the FTT had not opened its tramway due to an unavailability of power supply. The Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board had been formed in 1920, and by the time the tram was available for use, it had become MMTB, M-Class Tram number 185. The tram was once again sold, this time to the SECV Bendigo Tramways in 1935, and on its arrival was converted to one-man configuration as number 19. In September 1972, the Bendigo Trust converted the tram back to its former California combination configuration, using components from scrapped former SECV Bendigo tram number 10. In October 2003, the tram was outshopped sporting a new coat of paint and the installation of unique LED lights commemorating the history of the tram. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, 1917, for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 20. The early history of this tram is similar to number 19, except it operated in Melbourne as MMTB number 187. When in operational condition, the tram is available for hire and will be restored to SECV 1972 configuration. In 1966, the tram was withdrawn from service by the SECV because it was black-banned by the Bendigo branch of the Tramways Union. The tram's body was in poor condition and considered to be unsuitable for traffic. The tram was made fully operational by the Bendigo Trust in 1975 and had run on special outings from time to time. It now sits at the Gasworks depot awaiting an armature replacement and other minor works before it will again be roadworthy. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, in 1917 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 21. Like its two sister trams, 185 and 187, number 188 arrived in Bendigo in 1935. As Bendigo number 21, it has retained its one-man configuration, and in 1975 the bodywork received attention and was painted in the SECV livery of the 1930s. In October 1992, the tram was repainted in the grey, white and blue livery of the Hawthorn and Footscray Tramways Trusts to celebrate a significant event in the history of the city of Footscray. This livery was temporary, with the colours of the HTT being represented in the future with the restoration of HTT number 1. Number 21 has since been repainted in a more accurate representation of its 1930s livery. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, 1917 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 23. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust number 17. With the formation of the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, it became number 123. It was sold to the SECV Bendigo Tramways in 1945 to become the first double-bogie tram to operate in Bendigo as number 23. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, 1916 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 24. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust number 32. With the formation of the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, it became MMTB number 138. It was sold to the SECV Bendigo Tramways in 1945 to become number 24. The tram was repainted in the MMTB livery of 1945 during 1975. The tram has been cosmetically restored as Hawthorn Tramways Trust number 32. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 25. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust number 27. With the formation of the MMTB, it became number 133. It was sold to the SECV Bendigo Tramways in 1947 to become number 25. In 1972, this tram was selected as one of 4 cars to inaugurate the talking tram service for the Bendigo Trust and was painted in the new livery of the Bendigo Trust. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, 1917 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 26. This tram first operated in Melbourne as Hawthorn Tramways Trust number 29. With the formation of the MMTB, it became number 135. It was sold to the SECV Bendigo Tramways in 1947 to become number 26. On the 16th of April 1972, this was the last tram to travel from the borough of Eagle Hawke to the city of Bendigo. It was also the last tram to travel under its own power from Bendigo to Eagle Hawke when it was donated by the SEC to the borough of Eagle Hawke to take its place behind the town hall as a permanent exhibit. The tram was returned to Bendigo in April 1977, almost 5 years since being gifted to Eagle Hawke. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia in 1917 for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust. Number 28. Car 28 was one of 4 trams which reintroduced trams to the streets of Bendigo in December 1972. Initially, the tram operated in its former SECV livery, and in 1974 the tram was painted in the livery of the Bendigo Trust. Number 28 was built new by J.G. Brill & Company, Philadelphia, USA in 1925 for the MTT. While in Adelaide, it operated as number 304 and was purchased by the SECV for the Geelong Tramways in 1936, where it operated as number 28. It transferred under SECV ownership to Bendigo in 1947 as number 28. This Burnie and number 29 was available for service right up to the cessation of SECV tram services, and was often used as a decorated tram for special occasions. The tram was the last tram to return to the depot upon cessation to SECV Tramways operations on 16th April 1972. Numbers 28 and 30 were the mainstay of weekend talking tram services in the first decade of operation by the Bendigo Trust. With the increase in patronage on the tramway, the tram now serves as a backup unit to the larger cars. Easter Monday in particular sees the Burnies operating as a double header with the larger service cars. Builder J.G. Brill & Company, Philadelphia, USA 1925 for the Municipal Tramways Trust in Adelaide, South Australia. Number 29. The history of this tram is similar to number 28. While in Adelaide, it operated as number 302 and was purchased by the SECV for the Geelong Tramways in 1936, where it operated as number 29. It transferred under SECV ownership to Bendigo in 1947 as number 29. This tram was the famous hijack tram, and the details of this event will be covered in the next chapter. In 1981, number 29 was restored to its former MTT G-Class livery and has operated in Bendigo as number 302 ever since. Builder J.G. Brill & Company, Philadelphia, USA 1925 for Municipal Tramways Trust, Adelaide, South Australia. Number 30. The history of this tram is similar to number 28. While in Adelaide it operated as number 301 and was purchased by the SECV for the Geelong Tramways in 1936, where it operated as number 30. It transferred under SECV ownership to Bendigo in 1947 as number 30. However, upon its arrival in Bendigo, this tram was placed in storage in the paint shop at the tram depot and used for spare parts for the other Burnies. It was deemed to be surplus to requirements, as the tramway had sufficient one-man trams at that time. It was not until number 27 was severely damaged that number 30 was brought into service, with some parts being exchanged between number 27 and 30 in order to make number 30 operational. At the time the Bendigo Trust took over the running of the Bendigo Tramways, Car 30 had been in a damaged condition. It was decided to repair Car 30 as one of 4 trams which were to inaugurate the talking tram service, and work commenced on 18th September 1972. Number 30 was the flagship of the tramways during the early years. Builder J.G. Brill & Company, Philadelphia, USA 1925 for the Municipal Tramways Trust, Adelaide, South Australia. The Scrubber. This tram operated in Bendigo as one of 2 summer trams from 1913 until 1953, when it was converted to a track cleaning tram. The tram continued in this role until it was involved in a car head collision with the tram it was replaced by, bogie car number 17. The tram remained out of service during the final years of operation by the SECV. When the Bendigo Trust took over the tramway, the damaged upper sections of the front end were removed and the tram ran in this state until withdrawal for rebuilding in 1975. In January 1978, Number 17 was transported to Melbourne to take part in the Australia Day Cavalcade of Transport celebrations along Spencer Street. The tram was the first Bendigo tram to operate on the Melbourne system, and since then a number of former Melbourne trams have returned to operate there on special occasions. A rebuild of the body and truck was completed in time for the centenary of electric operation of the Ballarat tramways in 2005. Builder Duncan and Fraser Adelaide, South Australia, 1913, for the Electric Supply Company of Victoria Bendigo Tramways. The Bendigo Trust was established in 1970 as a result of a general concern in the community that the legacy of the past was being squandered. The impetus for its beginning came as a direct response to two particular cases for preservation, initially the Central Deborah Gold Mine and later the Tramway. The Central Deborah Gold Mine, the second last working mine on the Bendigo diggings, closed in 1954 and was put on the market in January 1970. It seemed certain that it would be broken up and sold for scrap. The SECV and the Country Roads Board were keen to get rid of the tramway, which had run at a loss for many years and created problems connected with road maintenance. But feelings about the past had changed, and the decade of the 70s was to witness a new public attitude to issues of conservation and preservation. The Bendigo City Council bought the Central Deborah Gold Mine to save it from destruction, and in April 1970 the view was first aired that there was a need in Bendigo for a common body to advise on historical matters and preservation. With the tramway system under serious threat and public opinion running high, such a body was formed by the end of the year and named the Bendigo Trust. The Bendigo Trust was formed initially with the brief to encourage and coordinate the preservation and development of any assets which would add to the appreciation of Bendigo's early history. Its specific objective was the restoration and management of the Central Deborah Gold Mine and plans for the Victoria Hill diggings. The housing and display of Chinese relics and general tourist promotion were included. At the Trust meetings early in 1971, the preservation of the trams was raised and soon the fight was on. In September 1970, the Honourable Jim Balfour, Minister for Fuel and Power, declared that trams in both Bendigo and Ballarat had outlived their usefulness, and added that there was no evidence to suggest they should be retained as a tourist attraction. The Trust disagreed, and a small study group was set up to examine the possibilities. The group included Harry Biggs, Dennis O'Hoy, Albert Richardson and Edgar Harrison, with co-opted members Darryl McClure, Robin Green, Murray Mansfield, Vic Smythe and Ken Hesse, men who were to play a large part in saving Bendigo's vintage trams. From this group came the idea that a section of the original tram track could be retained and a scenic tour arranged which would link a number of places of historic interest. For the next 18 months, the battle to save the trams was to rage furiously, engaging the emotions of people not only in Bendigo but all over the country. No blood was spilt, but there was an attempt to remove a tram. A petition was signed by many thousands of people, and there were countless articles and letters in the local and metropolitan press. Politicians were to come out passionately either for or against the trams. Outspoken as always, Victoria's Premier Sir Henry Bolte said that the idea of tourist trams would be corny and gimmicky without achieving the result Bendigo would want. But there was more constructive support from many local politicians and civic leaders. Most Bendigo people were keen to retain their trams, although one local progress association wrote to the Bendigo Advertiser saying that the idea was childish and impractical, as it would prevent the building of a 4-lane highway through Bendigo. We want real progress, not sentimental stupidity blocking up the centre of the city. Well-known columnist and tram lover Keith Dunstan wrote in The Sun that Bendigo had probably the only working Bernie cars in the world. Dear little trams built for one-man operation in the US during the Depression. They are even rarer than an original Da Vinci or Michelangelo. In July 1971, the Bendigo Trust presented a 22-page submission to the Bendigo City Council asking for the retention of the track and overhead gear from High Street at Violet Street to the Emu Point terminus at North Bendigo, plus the access from Macrae Street to the Arnold Street depot, together with the use of the tram sheds for storage, display and maintenance, the existing converter station, all the trams, maintenance equipment, uniforms, ticket punches, cash bags and historical records. The Trust had settled on the proposed route as it was considered that this particular section of line, as well as going through the city centre, passed more points of interest than any other section. In addition, the track was mostly over level ground and therefore easier to maintain and would put less strain on the trams. The State Cabinet had indicated that it would make all the necessary equipment available free for tourist attraction purposes, and to this end gave $5,000 for immediate restoration work to get the scheme underway. It expressed the hope that the tramway would run as a self-supporting and preferably profitable enterprise. The Trust case was backed up by its success with the Central Deborah gold mine, which, although only partly restored and without any advertising campaign, had attracted more than 10,000 visitors in its first 6 months of operation. Support was growing for the tramway scheme, and in August the Bendigo City Council gave its positive backing, but the fight was far from over. Other interested parties were keen to obtain trams for their own collections, and the SECV and CRB were still to put obstacles in the way. The SECV was determined to retain the tram depot for its own use, and the CRB was adamant about preventing the retention of tram tracks on the highway. But support from the government came from the Honourable Vance Dickey, Minister of Tourism, who said that he was in favour of the tourist tram system after the buses were introduced, and that the Trust could be assured of cooperation and assistance for a trial period of 21 months. At this point, a moratorium was placed on the dispersion of all tram cars, plant and equipment until the end of the trial period. Now the battle for the trams began in earnest. All sorts of groups were keen to get examples of Bendigo's trams, and the SECV announced that it had 123 offers to buy trams for various purposes. There were only 23 trams in the fleet, in varying states of repair. The Bendigo Trust was determined to keep them all. It pointed out that if it retained the whole fleet, and in particular the rare Bernie cars, Bendigo would have a tramway which was unique in the world. It was believed that the only other Bernie cars still running at that time were in Brazil. The Trust hoped to make Bendigo the San Francisco of the South, and was sure that the retention of the trams would herald a great new tourist industry for the area. The Trust Tramway Committee lobbied hard and long with frequent deputations to state parliamentarians and meetings with the SECV and the CRB. The committee was enthusiastically supported by an army of volunteers comprised of members of the Bendigo Trust and other interested people in the community. There were fundraising activities, petitions and work parties. Without the involvement of these people, the fleet would certainly have been split up, and perhaps all Bendigo would have retained would have been a single tram on a concrete plinth in some forgotten corner of the city. The Trust was determined that a small but authentic section of the original network should be kept as an operating service to carry people on a tour through the city. Bendigo's system was to be unique, a proper tramway, not just a joyride on some remote section of track. It was envisioned that a functional unit of each tram which had operated in Bendigo should be kept and gradually restored, either to its original state or in some modified version. The tram sheds, historic as the trams themselves, were to be used for storage and as a converter station, with facilities for maintenance and with a section for a museum. The Trust's persistence was finally rewarded, and in September 1972, it was announced that the Victorian Cabinet had approved a 2-year trial for the tourist tramway. The Honourable Alan Hunt, Minister for Local Government, announced that 4 trams were to run over 8 kilometres of track as a tourist attraction, from the Central Deborah Gold Mine to the Emu Point terminus, and that the state government would provide money to get the trams running again. The Trust was authorised to conduct the service, and a proposal to extend the tram line from High Street into Violet Street so that passengers could enter and alight outside the Central Deborah Gold Mine and away from the highway traffic was approved. A capital grant of $5,000 was also approved by the Bendigo City Council to get the project started, and a further $5,000 was lent to the Trust by the Council. The Trust planned to open the tourist tramway before Christmas. With the Honourable Rupert Hamer, Premier of Victoria, already agreeing to open the new tramway on 9th December, the Trust flew into action. An appeal for volunteer helpers resulted in a flood of skilled tradespeople and others willing to pitch in as labourers, and the work of restoration began. The uniforms for the new operators, motormen and conductors, were replicas of those worn from the early days of the Electric Supply Company of Victoria. The blue serge suits with red braid were made up by Ashmans of Bendigo, who drafted special patterns from photographs taken in 1903. Buttons and badges were struck by a Melbourne firm which still retained the original dyes. In the early days, many of the Trust's volunteer drivers and conductors paid for their uniforms from their own pockets. While preparations were underway, a dramatic event occurred which was to make national headlines and become known as Bendigo's Eureka. Years before the SECV service ended, that instrumentality had promised one of the Bernie cars to the Australian Electric Transport Museum of Adelaide. But when the Trust took over the fleet, it was determined to keep its collection complete, and so refused to let the Bernie tram go. The Adelaide group decided to collect the tram, and in October 1972 arrived and conferred with the local SECV manager. But word got out, and the attempt was seen locally as unacceptable. Trust members acted quickly. They removed the tram's jacks and, with bodily force, there being no electric power available, pushed the tram back into the shed and welded pieces of metal to the rails, thus making removal impossible. The Victorian press headlined this incident as an attempted hijack. The Mayor of Bendigo, Councillor Joe Pearce, announced over the local radio station that the people of Bendigo would rally to the defence of their trams, and the Adelaide group returned to South Australia tram. The Bendigo Trust was criticised in the Adelaide press for employing bushranger tactics. Maybe it was the return of the old spirit of the gold rush days, but the tram remained, and Bendigo's collection of Bernies was still intact.
On 2 of the Bernie trams, not any of the other trams, the Bernie trams in particular. And one was for the number 11, which said no work to be done on this tram number 11. And that tram was destined to go to the Tramways Museum Society of Victoria, supposedly. And the second sign was placed on tram number 29, and it had a similar sign put on it, no work to be done on this tram number 29. I think Ken Hesse then made some inquiries with Ray Downey, the SEC manager, to find out just exactly what was going on, and that's when things began to evolve as far as what was really behind those signs.
It turned out that a truck was on its way from Adelaide to come and pick up tram number 29, and it was already sitting in the depot yard, ready for loading.
Well, of course, once that was revealed, we knew what was going to happen next, because the 4 jacks were immediately adjacent to the tram in the rightful position, as were the carry bars that go across from the jacks. And that sort of started the blood running in many people's veins, and of course there was a call for action.
Yeah, a few of us decided that we were capable of pushing it back in. Yeah, so we pushed the tram back in without the power, of course, because we didn't have access to the power. So a few of us pushed it back in. Yes, and somebody had welded a piece of pipe across the tram. That gave us a lot of publicity, pushing that tram back in, and the pipe being welded across the track.
Now, the statute of limitations is well past. I think you can own up to the fact that you were the person that got out the electrodes and got the welder going and did the job. And we sort of, brushed our hands together at the time. We thought we did a terrific job.
On Saturday, 9th December 1972, only 8 months after the last SECV trams had ceased, the Honourable Rupert Homer, Premier of Victoria, broke a bottle of Bendigo District red wine over the front of tram number 30 and launched the Bendigo Vintage Talking Trams. The new tourist tramway, initially with 4 cars, advertised unique vintage tourist trams travelling through the heart of historic Bendigo. The service was to run on weekends and public holidays, with special services during school holidays. It was an immediate success, and in the first few months, more than 6,000 passengers were carried. Over the years, government grants have assisted the Bendigo Trust in its aim to restore the whole fleet of vintage trams to working condition, with the result that now 20 of the original 23 trams are available for service. In the mid-70s, under government schemes to give work to the unemployed, the Trust was able to achieve giant strides in improving the fleet. The tram depot, the track and the museum. Several trams received major repairs and rebuilds, involving a lot of work. Ceremonies were arranged from time to time to officially recommission each tram, and good media publicity resulted on each occasion. When the Bendigo Trust was granted approval to run part of the tramways as a tourist attraction through the city, the SECV, under government instructions, allowed the use by the Trust of the equipment, rolling stock and accoutrements. Although the Trust Bendigo Tramways commenced operations on 9th December 1972, there were prolonged negotiations over the ownership of the trams, and eventually an agreement was reached with the SECV on 2nd May 1977 for the acquisition of the fleet by the Trust. In a ceremony on 21st June 1977, at what was to be an historic milestone in the history of the Bendigo Tramways, Mr J.K. Griffin, representing the SECV, officially sold all the tramcars to the Bendigo Trust for the magnificent sum of $1. Although the dollar note was only a token, the Trust was not exactly getting a bargain, for when the Tramways Committee Chairman Mr Ken Hesse accepted ownership, he also accepted the problems of an elderly and worn-out fleet of trams. After lengthy negotiations, the Bendigo City Council purchased the depot and former powerhouse area and buildings from the SECV on 26 February 1988. The Trust was allowed to use the tram shed and office block, while the powerhouse and machine shop were leased to the Bendigo Woolen Mills. Subsequently, the rails, poles, overhead wires and underground cables were transferred to the Trust for another $1 on 27th August 1992, and so ended over 61 years of SECV involvement with the Bendigo tramway
The
system.
site of the future Golden Link building at Bendigo's Central Deborah Mine was the stage for the official sale of the tracks, lines and fittings that form an integral part of Bendigo's tram system. The Bendigo Trust bought the trams from the SEC in 1976 for the token price of $1. Today's transaction for the same sum completes the handover of the tramways.
Well, it really is completing an era. It marks an end to the time that the State Electricity Commission has had any actual ownership or involvement with the running of trams in Bendigo.
The historic nature of the sale was appropriately marked by the exchange of a 10-shilling note, the SEC resisting the urge to secure some much-needed state revenue.
No, I think much nor as they'd have liked to. They were pretty reasonable, and we ended up buying the whole lot for the princely sum of $1.
In the early 90s, the overhead trolley wire was causing concern due to the continual wear to it caused by the friction and arcing of the trolley wheels. The Trust purchased a drum of new trolley wire and many new fittings to help renew the network of wires, but the main boost to this big task came from the generosity of the Honourable Alan Brown, Minister for Transport, who made available one elevating platform wagon and 2 drums of trolley wire. The Trust's overhead crew have worked long and hard at various times of the day and night to string the new trolley wire and recondition the supporting span wires. The year 1990 saw the Trust celebrate the centenary of trams in Bendigo. A week-long exhibition was held in a shop at Charing Cross in October. A commemorative plaque was unveiled by the mayors of Bendigo and Eagle Hawk. A grand parade of trams filled Pall Mall, and many other functions occupied a busy year. Now, with the trams running daily and attracting visitors to Bendigo from all states of Australia, plus many overseas tourists, the tramway is a viable financial proposition. The Trust's activities since its formation has been governed by a board of directors with a chief executive officer. Tram drivers present the tour and give a personal commentary at the depot to the many thousands of adults and school children who ride the trams each year. Several former SECV drivers joined the Trust. The first senior driver, or motorman to give him his correct tramway title, was Tom Hulls, who was joined by Jack Worth, Norm Aitken and George Sang, all now deceased, along with Jack Evans. Their experience and knowledge made a great contribution to the service. The success of the tramway could never have been achieved had it not been for the hundreds of volunteers who worked so hard in a variety of jobs to make what was once just a dream come true. It is impossible to name the men, women and children who planted trees, paved the Emu Point terminus, who have patiently cleaned and maintained the tracks, worked on the electric wiring on the trams and the overhead gear, fitted indicators and stoplights, painted and polished the trams, installed sound systems, relayed tracks, scripted the commentary, researched the background of the rolling stock and the early days of the tramway, and put out publicity and promotional material. Impossible to name them all, but equally impossible to forget them, as the Bendigo Tramways today is a working testament to their efforts in the past and to their continuing efforts at present and into the future. In the first 24 years of operation, nearly 1.25 million people travelled on Bendigo's vintage talking trams. Solid proof of the universal interest in trams and the worth of this type of historic preservation. With the arrival of the 21st century, the Bendigo Tramways has grown from strength to strength. Today, Bendigo Tramways is Australasia's largest tourist tramway and welcomes over 40,000 visitors annually. The Bendigo Tramways depot is the oldest operating tram depot in Australia and is listed on the Victorian Heritage Register. There have been many and colourful milestones, of which will be briefly touched upon here. With the centennial birthdays of the trams either approaching or already past, starting with bogie car number 5 and Bendigo's toast rack tram number 17 in 2013. Since then, every tram excepting the Burnie cars have passed their 100-year milestones. The Burnies will soon be 100 years old this decade. Back in the late 80s to late 90s, a number of new ex-Melbourne W2, SW5 and SW6 class trams were added to the fleet with the purpose of taking much of the workload off the original fleet. Most of these cars were renumbered to reflect the Bendigo fleet and were numbered 31 through to 36. Some of these, however, had their Melbourne fleet numbers returned, and number 441, which was the original 150th Victoria Anniversary tram, always maintained its Melbourne fleet number and today is currently a member of the Perth Electric Tramway Society's fleet. Number 976, which became Bendigo's cafe tram and later the restaurant tram, also retained its Melbourne fleet number. W2 class number 456, though having maintained its Melbourne fleet number, was never used in traffic and resides at the gasworks. Further to the addition of Melbourne W class trams, there was also a Y1 class number 610 added, and a tram the like of which was never seen on Bendigo streets and may never again, Z2 class number 74. Along with these cars came ex-Adelaide H-type tram number 369, which along with 610 has seen frequent use. On 9th December 2012, the milestone of 40 years of talking vintage trams was reached and was celebrated with a reunion of volunteers and staff. The highlight was the launching of the fully restored 1903 Esco tram number 8 with a bottle of Bendigo Region red wine, just as it was on the 9th December 1972, when the talking tram service was first launched. In a lot of respects, Bendigo Tramways is pretty much professional today, with the inclusion of the workshop staff who maintain the current fleet, perform outstanding restorations of not only Bendigo's original SECV fleet, but have and continue to restore trams for other systems and museums from far afield. Chief among this work is the rebuilding and restoration of Melbourne's remaining W-class fleet, which run in traffic on the city circle around the Melbourne CBD. Bendigo Tramways restoration work on these trams has it in high demand from many places around Australia and the world. This work will ensure Bendigo Tramways has a future that will not only restore heritage trams and other rolling stock, but provide local jobs for many years to come. The amazing staff of Bendigo Tramways, from its inception in 1890 through to the SECV closure in 1972, and the Bendigo Trust's seemingly endless army of volunteers has given this quaint, regional and historic tramway the character and passion that has seen it rise from the ashes on a number of occasions. This dedication will see the Bendigo Tramways through to an amazingly bright future that very soon will include the 50th anniversary of the talking trams and the opening of new depot space and display and workshop facilities to house the remaining W-class trams from Newport in Melbourne, and to provide protection for the original SECV fleet with the ability to restore all these trams in time.
If nothing else, these ancient trams provide objects of great local interest. But for how long? The cost of hauling people has become exorbitant too.
When the State Electricity Commission closed the tramways in 1972, locals banded together to save it. A number of self-proclaimed Bendigo rebels even welded a tram to the track in protest.
About half a dozen of us pushed this tram back into the shed. We thought, how are we going to stop it from being pinched? Right, we'll weld a piece of bar to the track, that'll stop it. And then someone else thought, yeah, but they can still move it if they need to. And so we removed the brushes from the motor so that the electricity wouldn't be able to make the tram move even if they did.
A group called the Bendigo Trust was formed, and they bought the entire 23 tram fleet for just $1.
Oh, that's getting harder.
Fast forward almost 50 years, and the Bendigo Tramways is renowned for its expertise in restoring heritage trams, including the trams that grace Melbourne City Circle. Earlier this month, the Tramways received an $11 million grant from the Victorian State Government to expand its workshop and services. As part of the expansion, about 25 historic W-class trams currently gathering dust in Melbourne will be brought here for restoration.
It will go from 3 workstations in our workshop up to 8 to 9 workshops spaces. So it's really a positive thing for us in that we'll be able to chase a whole range of work, not just trams, because there's other aligned skills we like to do. We like to do full heavy rail carriages.
It's something Mick McGowan could have only dreamed of in the 70s.
We've come a long way in the 47 years since that took place, and I suppose we all had some sort of vision that it wasn't just going to be a museum preserving it, is that it would move forward and it would show the evolution of the Bendigo trams.